before you speak. I won't say anything more than that, but sometimes a little bit of thought goes a long way. Guys, just before we get into the material today, your next assignment is due on the 27th. And guys, I'm going to give you some guidance. I had to ding a few people for some mistakes in the last paper. Guys, I did not put a page requirement for the last one, and I'm not big on long papers. If you can make your point 1 to 2 pages, or even 1 page, I'm all for it. But guys, do the following things. Number 1, when you submit your assignment, please submit it as a Word file. That way I can make comments on it. Number 2, substantially cover your issues. Simply stating facts without giving me some elaboration is not good. I'm asking you, for example, if you cite a source, tell me why that source is important. In terms of citing sources, I'm not going to ding you on whether or not you're using APA format perfectly, but I am asking for in-text citation. So if you tell me where you got something, just cite it in text, give me a way to verify it. Quotations. Guys, a common practice is to take a long quote out of an article and insert it. That's not really acceptable in academic writing. What I'm asking you to do is to tell me why that quote is important. And there are important quotes and there are not important quotes. For example, a quote from history. If we're saying Martin Luther King, who said, "I have a dream," that's important because those words are very important. A quote that just gives statistics is not important to quote. You paraphrase that stuff. So I'm asking you to thoroughly cover your subject. I'm asking you to use at least 3 sources. Now, I'm flattered that some of you used some of my PowerPoint slides or my quotations as your sources, but I'm asking you to please use external sources. So use sources such as a textbook, that can be one of your sources, but at least 2 other sources. For example, Forbes magazine, or the Wall Street Journal, or Google News have all kinds of resources you can use to pull in some current events. So for the next assignment, and again, if you're having questions whether or not you did something right, give me some notice, stop and see me in my office. I'll gladly go through your document with you and give you feedback. I want you to do well on the next assignment. Guys, tonight is your first opportunity for some extra credit. If you are able to come and see Miss Michelle Singletary speak in JFK, I'm going to give you 2 points in your first test. Now, if you don't know who this person is, she's a journalist for the Washington Post, and she talks about financial responsibility. Her big page cause is making sure that young people are doing good things for their finances, that they're not getting themselves in credit trouble, that they're really investing in the future. She's a fantastic speaker, and it's a really rare opportunity that we get a Washington Post columnist coming to visit us here at St. Francis. Dr. Fry made this happen. I know it would mean the world to him to see a nice representation of our students, and I'm incentivizing your attendance with 2 points. Now, guys, I'm going to be at the event, and I'm just being straight with you. If I see you leave 10 minutes into the event, I'm not giving you the credit. Come, stay for the event, listen to this lady speak. She is fantastic, and you're going to learn something. I'm going to learn something, and I'll be there with you. Guys, in the news, we're still talking about GM, who is still continuing their strike. We're going to watch a video based on where we are currently and talk about some of the extenuating issues. Inside the room as follows. You guys over here are the management of GM. You guys are the rank and file. So we've got the union to my left. That was unintentional, because the union is leaning left. But we've got the union on the left, we've got management on the right. Management, what is your perspective here? How do you feel about the offers you've made? Are these competitive to these employees, and if so, why? What are the big issues here that you see in terms of what are your bargaining points? Justin, what's something that the company is saying here that was just on the screen? What are they saying to the employees?
They lower the payroll for medical.
Exactly. Did you guys catch, by the way, for our members of management here, what are these folks in the union currently paying for health care? Yes. That's pretty cheap, isn't it? And so our folks over here in the union, they want you guys to go from 3 to 4% to 15% for your health care. What's your response to that? You're saying no, and what's your justification for that? And it's okay not to know the answer, but like, what is ultimately your justification for saying no on?
Going to 15 from 3 to 4 is a pretty big leap in itself.
That's a pretty big step. Go ahead, Sarah. Follow up your comment there. very good.
And then also, like, if the company is making more in profit and has more money to spend, why are we paying more than we already were?
So I'm going back to management here. Guys, collectively, my management, these guys are saying, hey, well, we don't want to pay 15% for healthcare. We're only paying 2 to 3 now. That's a pretty big jump. We're in dangerous jobs, and you guys are making money hand over fist. What's your response? What are your thoughts? Adam, what do you think? What will be your response? These guys are basically saying you guys are making money hand over fist, and 15% is a pretty big jump from 3. What's your response?
I definitely wouldn't be. I wouldn't like a jump from not 50%. We're making all the money.
And so, what did GM offer the employees? Did you guys catch what they were offering back to the employees, and it wasn't incentives for healthcare? What were you guys offering the employees? Did you catch it? Higher wages, some more jobs, more development. The idea we're gonna create bigger jobs. The union is basically saying, and we learned this from our previous statements too. They don't want just more jobs. They want guarantees that people who are working as temps are going to be able to come in and get good union jobs. Guys, there's something going on here between these two sides, and it's called posturing. Has anybody here, and I'm not talking about eBay, has anybody ever actually had to haggle or bargain in real life? Have you ever tried to buy something where you made an offer for something that you didn't want to pay sticker for? Have you ever been in that movie? Emily, what happens when you haggle?
Well, I went to Jamaica before, and they don't really have set prices, so I went to a gift shop. I got like a t-shirt that's overpriced, so I was like, I'll give you 12 instead of like 16 or something. You just bargain with your price.
So what price did you end up with?
I know with my price, 12.
How about that? See, if I was a union here, I want this lady doing your bargaining. You got a hard bargainer over here. Guys, what this comes down to, for example, if you, by the way, when you buy your first car, you can do this dance too if you haven't done it already. What it comes down to is bargaining is all about posturing. It's playing a game of chicken, seeing who's going to blink first. These guys over here in management are saying, you know, you're not paying enough for your healthcare union. You're going to have to pay more. We want you at 15%. In reality, management, what would you probably be happy with if you're not getting all the 15? Avery, what are you going to settle for? Well, you personally, if somebody's trying to talk you into a 15%, if you're trying to talk them into a 15% increase, what's going to convince you to say, hey, we can meet in the middle? What percentage? So we got a hard bargainer here too. But the point is, it's going to fall out somewhere in the middle. And what this whole exercise is the company and the union seeing who has more leverage and more power. Now, the company's got some serious leverage here because the company is doing well and they want to include their employees in. They're already paying these folks very well. What leverage does the union have at this standpoint? Yes? Labor. So they got labor, they got trained labor, and what also came out in the news? How much money is GM losing on this thing? Yeah, a day. That's your main leverage, guys. Come back to the table that says basically if you give us a reasonable offer on this benefits, we can come to some compromise. We realize that your health care is expensive. We realize this is the number one thing, as Todd said, driving the election in 2020. This is important stuff. But it's going to come down to who's going to make the first offer and start to conciliate. Nobody wants to be the first one to blink. If we look at GM, for example, what GM is saying is that we need temps. Why does GM want temps? Because if production demands go up, they can add capacity. If they go down, they can get rid of the temps. And if the temps aren't members of the union, how hard is it to get rid of them? Is it hard or easy? It's easy if they're not in the union. If you have temps who are not in the union, I can fire you at will because you're still an at-will employee. If those folks become members of the union, then we got to go through the collective bargaining agreement, and we got to do mediation of whether or not we're going to get rid of people. We've got to go through all these processes. So GM is saying we want to keep temps to expand capability without having to pay union wages or deal with the other stuff that comes involved with it. They're also saying basically that we need to build new capabilities. Some of the new things that GM wants to build, they want autonomous cars. Guys, in terms of cars themselves, How are they changing in the 21st century? What's different about the car you're going to buy 5 years ago versus the one you would buy today? What's going to change? Most likely, yes.
More stuff is reliant on like technology and electronics versus more mechanical things.
Exactly right. Bill Ford, the CEO of Ford Motor Company, says he no longer owns a car company. He owns a technology company that sells cars. And so the point is, we're going to invest in you guys, we're going to train you, we're going to make you into better employees. That's what GM is saying. Now, this is something that just came out. All those folks who are on the picket lines right now, as of yesterday, do not have health care. GM is not paying their health care while they are on strike. They've given them access to something called COBRA, which means you can pay your own premiums and keep your health care, but we're not paying it. And right now, these folks are used to paying 3% of their health care. Yes?
Do they get paid while they're on strike?
They get strike pay. So the union pays you a fee while you're on strike. Now, the person who was making, anywhere between $45,000 and $90,000 a year is now making the equivalent of $250 a week. That comes down to about $6.50 an hour. So compare that versus what these folks are making. They're putting some pressure on the workers. There's no two ways about it. The workers are putting pressure back. Who's going to win this one? I'm not really sure. If you guys were betting people, at this point in time, knowing the pressure that's on GM and knowing the pressure that's on the union, who are you betting on? There's no grade involved here. I'm just curious. Sarah, who do you think?
I think the workers, because they're still paying losing, what did you say, million?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the workers are gonna.
We're going to go to Kenny, then we'll go to Adam. Kenny.
Can't GM just wait out?
If GM doesn't bleed out first, they absolutely could. They could basically say we're going to hold this strike. We're not operating on a collective bargaining agreement. What would happen though if they can't hire people to start those factories back up? If this gets held up in court in an injunction, which we're going to talk about today, they could basically be in a situation where they're running out of cars to sell. Adam.
I think the workers are going to kind of win, but I think it seems like GM will still get like something that they want. It won't completely be towards the workers' side. It seems like they're very kind of like stern with their position.
I think there's definitely going to have to be some compromises for this to get resolved. I'm asking you guys for your own opinion too, based on what you've seen so far. And I don't expect that people are watching this maybe as closely as I am because I love this stuff. Whose side are you on? If you had to take your own leanings, whether you're pro or anti-union, based on the information you've seen so far, whose side do you come out on? Who's in the right, who's in the wrong here? What do you think? There's no worry about being right or wrong. I'm just curious for your opinion.
I think just in terms of the wage side of things, well, and the healthcare, I think that the workers should be getting at least a little more, not necessarily like maybe as much as they want, but some, because it seems like GM's doing really well right now, and they wouldn't necessarily be where they're at without the workers.
So the workers deserve something. We got that, Kenny.
I think other than a little cheap shot in the debate about corruption union leadership around public opinion, like everything's been negative towards GM, positive for the union workers on strike.
You mentioned a good point too. If anybody who hasn't been following this in the news, there's a corruption charge coming out against a lot of people who are heads of the UAW, United Auto Workers, basically saying these folks have been living large on the backs of the union. And some of the major players in the union administration might actually get arrested sometime in the next couple of weeks for things like racketeering. Doesn't look good for them, but we haven't seen much of that in the news yet. What about some people on this side of the room? Whose side are you on? What are your thoughts? Rashawn, whose side are you on? And tell me why. The company's doing well, why aren't the employees doing well? Guys, here's where I think that they're going to, any other opinions? Because here's where I think this is going to come out in the court of public opinion to some extent. And I'm sorry this is taking so long, but this is current events and it's very important. Guys, most people in the United States have what's called a defined contribution plan and not a defined benefit plan. This crosses over to HR a little bit, but let me explain this. Right now, the fact that these guys are paying very little for their health care means they've got what's called a defined contribution plan. And what that means is when they go to the doctor, they're not paying big co-pays, they've been promised a certain level of benefit. A defined contribution plan is what most people in the country work on, and that means you're responsible for a substantial part of your own benefits, your retirement, your health care. I'll give you an example. I work on what is called a high deductible plan, so I contribute every paycheck into my own health care. And as a family, I have a deductible of $4,500 before major things are covered under my health care. Most Americans have very similar plans. So the few industries where these kinds of benefit plans persist tend to be union. They tend to be the education union, the auto workers union, people who are involved in big established unions. And I think in the court of public opinion, a lot of people may be saying, I'm paying more for my health care, why should you guys be exempt? I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that that is one of the things that will come out in the wash. Not necessarily whether or not something is inherently right or wrong, but are you getting a better deal than I? Any comments? Ken?
When they both come to an agreement, will contracts and everything become public records, or will it still be?
Yeah, this stuff ultimately comes out in the public, and we'll know what they decide. And I'm not saying it's all going to be necessarily public domain, but trust me, it'll come out in the news, and we'll be able to find out what kind of a final deal they got. So guys, jumping back in, we left off talking about the National Labor Relations Board. Now, the National Labor Relations Board, we're going to watch a video here momentarily. Their main reason to exist is to administer the Labor Relations Act, the LMRA, the Labor Management Relations Act, I should say. And basically, if you remember, some of the earlier legislation failed because we had no way of making sure these rules were being backed up. Now, anytime the NLRB makes a decision, federal courts can review it and overturn it because these are federal government decisions. Generally speaking, the courts are supposed to look at the rule of law from the NLRB when they make decisions. What the main reason that the NLRB exists is to make sure that people are being treated fairly, that we're not getting into what we refer to as unfair labor practices. I won't mention the name of the speaker, but for example, when we had our guest speaker last Friday, do you remember what he said that they were using to stop some of the trucks from coming in and out of the factories? What were they using? Yes?
Out trucks, big ass nails to pop tires.
That would be considered an unfair labor practice to say that you're keeping an employer from operating their business during a strike by using those kinds of means. At the same time, when we look at some of the strikes, such as the Homestead incident, the idea of using armed militias to intimidate peaceful strikers, that gets to past unfair labor practices and the whole way into criminal activity. So what it also comes down to is the idea that if people are starting to form a union, the NLRB can come in and determine, is this a union pushing this idea, or do people in the company actually want representation? For example, if a union tries to come into a facility and the rank and file do not want to be members of the union, that is their prevailing sentiment, the union can also be basically convicted of unlawful labor practices or unfair labor practices by trying to intimidate people into joining the union as well. So we're going to watch a little video about the history of the NLRB and what its functions are. The idea of elections being sprung union elections being surprise elections, that could also play against the union too, because an employer has a captive audience, for example. So to say that from a more balanced perspective. Now guys, one of the ironies being, when I say this, I encourage you to have your own political beliefs and support the candidates you believe in. But generally speaking, if we say a political party and who their favor runs to, generally speaking, if we say Democrat, do we think pro or anti-union? Generally pro. If we say Republican, we think, generally speaking. Republican Party tends to be the party of business owners, tends to be the party of entrepreneurs. Not to say there aren't entrepreneurs and business owners who are also Democrats, but those are where the lines typically fall. One of the interesting parts, however, is in the last election, the person who was the conservative, in quotations, party candidate was Donald Trump. Were unions in support or against Donald Trump's election? They were, absolutely. Why was that? Because it's the right answer. What were some of Trump's campaign promises?
Was he pushing for more jobs?
More jobs, and where? Here. And so it's a rare circumstance, and we've seen this several times, for example. When President Clinton was in office back in the 90s, President Clinton was very famous for a piece of legislation we talked about previously in this class, to reduce borders for trade in North America. What was that called? You remember? NAFTA, correct. And so even though Bill Clinton was seen when he was elected as a friend of labor, when he installed this trade deal, essentially a lot of the labor unions said, this is no good for us. You're basically offshoring our jobs. So it's a situation, for example, where even though President Trump has populated the NLRB with people who are typically not pro-union, the unions are in support of Trump because of his pro-America First types of policies. And again, I leave that to you guys to decide what your beliefs are in that, but it's an interesting turn of events. The old adage is that politics creates strange bedfellows, and this is a case where the labor unions are supporting a conservative president, which is something we don't often see. So guys, in terms of how the NLRB is made up, as the video said, we've got 5 people who are appointed. The president can make the decision, the Senate confirms them, and right now in the United States, is the Senate Republican or Democrat controlled, Elliot? Bill?
The Senate?
Yes.
Republican.
Very much so. So the president basically could nominate pretty much anybody he wanted and was going to go through. The same would happen if we had a Democratic-controlled Senate and a Democratic president. We would have seen something similar. This is not something that indicts one political party being evil or good. It's just politics. People who are elected to this serve what we refer to as staggered 5-year terms. And that way, for example, not everybody starts at the same time. You may even see some carryover from a previous administration so that there is continuity, so that people can be working while other people are replaced. Now, those folks in Washington do wonderful things in terms of regulation, but a lot of the other responsibilities are decentralized, what we refer to as regional offices. So the country is split into districts, and that way if there are day-to-day issues that need to be decided or the law needs to be interpreted, they can do it in regional or circuit courts, for example. Now then we also have what we refer to as a general counsel, and this person answers to the NLRB. They're part of the NLRB, and if somebody is raising the idea of an unfair labor practice being brought into consideration, this person investigates and, where necessary, prosecutes. And we're going to be talking about some of the remedies, for example, to unfair labor practices. This person also, by the way, if a case goes to federal court, the general counsel is the person who is representing the court basically to enforce the letter of the law, particularly on things like labor injunctions and bargaining impasses, things like bargaining in bad faith. By the way, who here has ever heard that term before? Bargaining in bad faith. Raise your hand if you've heard that term. Anybody know what it means? Bargaining in bad faith, yes.
It means to sort of come to an agreement with no intention of actually withholding that agreement.
I think that's a great definition. So, for example, if somebody's bargaining in bad faith, okay, you're asking me to the bargaining table. I will. I'll come to the bargaining table. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to say nothing. I'm going to nod my head, and I'm not going to do anything. I have no intention of helping you out. That's an example of bad faith. Or if you come in trying to work an agenda that is underhanded, that also can be considered bad faith. So, guys, questions so far? We've been covering a lot of material. We've talked a lot about GM, and we started getting into the NLRB. I want to pause for a second for a question or comment from anywhere in the room. Question or comment, please. About anything. Elliot.
You gotta wonder what it's like when you have a president of one party and a senate of a different party, and then trying to get not only the NLRB board members elected, but also every other appointed position that the president has. The president needs Senate approval for majority of the positions, so it's something to see.
And you've lived it. You were there to see some of this stuff happen. Elliot, any good stories for us?
Well, I was on the House side. There's a lot of good House stories.
Yeah.
But I know when it came to the Senate, one of the big things that I didn't get to see firsthand, but got to hear about, was Kavanaugh and him trying to get approved, because there are a few Republicans that are like, maybe let's not elect this guy, when it was only like a 51-49 majority, and I think you had 2 senators who were Republican who were thinking, maybe let's not put this guy in, but then you had people saying he's a good man, he didn't do bad things, so that was still being talked about while I was there.
Well, it's neat to be a part of history when it's happening, isn't it? So, Guys, on this whole thing too, I think when we start talking about the politics of all this stuff, a lot of the decisions that get made behind closed doors are more about personal relationships than maybe we'd like to think they are. Not necessarily always the letter of the law, not necessarily always something that is ethical in nature so much as based on who you know, and this happens a lot. So in terms of why people are covered under the Labor Management Relations Act, it's essentially to make sure we're not mistreating people. And it also basically asserts control for whether or not we're going to take on a case. For example, the second bullet, the NLRB may refuse to assert jurisdictions in cases where it believes the effect on interstate commerce is minor. What that's basically saying is we're not going to get into regulatory issues and wasting taxpayer dollars over minor labor issues. For example, when we started talking about going across state lines, if there was a trucking issue, if there was something involving the truckers union that was having next to no economic impact in terms of, let's say, for example, these folks wanted to deliver goods a day later than promised, that maybe in some cases is not a major concern. It also set thresholds. This is the big one, guys, for who should be covered under the Labor Management Relations Act. So who should be covered? And it's important that we understand this. For example, people who are under jurisdiction and people who are not. There are very specific people who are not covered under the LMRA. People who work in agriculture, for example. Why is that, guys? When we look at some of these folks who are covered, or not covered, I should say, agriculture, people who work under the Railway Act, people who work as servants in homes, people like waiters, waitresses, maids, people who are employed by a parent or spouse, public sector employees, independent contractors, and supervisors. You may be saying, why are some of these people not covered by the Act? Well, when we start talking about people who are working for a parent or spouse, what kind of businesses are we talking about? You got it. We're talking about agricultural laborers. We're talking about migrant workers, for example. You can get away with not paying those folks overtime. By the way, there's other extreme exceptions, too. If you work for an amusement park in Pennsylvania, you can also get beneath minimum wage. Did you know that? If you work in a service industry, you can also get beneath minimum wage because they say you'll make it up in tips. Now, all that makes, I don't want to say sense, but you can see some of it. What about folks who work for the railroad, people who work in the public sector? Why are they exempt from coverage? Any ideas? I'll give you a hint. One says individuals covered by the Railway Labor Act. So what does that mean? They're already protected by another act. And when we get into public sector employees, there are very specific conditions about whether or not they can unionize and how. Then we get into supervisors. Supervisors means you are going to work a salaried position. And again, if we get into independent contractors, you can't charge overtime if you are working on a contract as an independent contractor, which, by the way, is a big part of the reason why companies like Uber and Lyft don't want these folks to be classified as employees. So the question is, what does exempt mean? Guys, very brief video that explains what the difference is if somebody's hourly or salary. Employers love salary jobs versus hourly. Why do employers love paying a salary instead of paying an hourly rate, EJ? Why would they prefer that? Why would I prefer paying a salary versus hourly? What's the difference between the two? If you work hourly, how do I pay you? Yeah, exactly. So salary would mean you get a flat rate no matter how many hours you work. Why would an employer prefer paying somebody a salary versus hourly? Yes?
You don't have to work overtime, for example.
Quite right. Literally, guys, in an average work week, if you're a salary employee, with some exceptions, you can literally work somebody as many hours as they need to work to get the job done. For example, people who are typically listed as salary employees, doctors are salary employees, executives are salary employees, teachers, generally speaking, are salary employees. Why would those folks work in a salary versus an hourly environment? In addition to the rules that are set there, why else? Ellie, go ahead.
Well, a lot of those jobs don't have like a set time. Like a doctor could be called in at any point in time, and then also some of those jobs have stuff that they have to take home and figure out that they don't have enough time to do while at the office.
They're very hard jobs to quantify. And it's very common. I hope that you see not just me, but other faculty members haunting Schwab Hall deep into the evening hours, because it does not make sense for us to work on an hourly wage. If I were paid my same salary on an hourly basis, I would be making a very puny hourly wage. But it's the nature of the job. It's how you get it done. We're going to talk more about thresholds of that for the next class. Guys, have a wonderful rest of your day.